Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hopefully the sound's coming through. 1, 2, 3. Okay, well, my output's the same as before, so look at some of your settings or whatever. See if you can turn it up on your side. Well, my out. Testing, 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 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 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 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay. It's on right now? Okay.
I set it up and said we'll let you run to make sure it's. So you signed all of those,
I signed them.
and I don't know if these need signed or not. These are just literally. I will have two announcements for you. There's one alternate.
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna sit on this end,
Okay.
so we can do that real easy.
No, so just leave them down there and. Oh, okay.
Good, yeah, yourself?
How was last night?
Good, good. Hey, how many do we have on
Right now or on the registration list?
registration?
Excuse me, I think it's like 157, something like that.
So, I asked Ted to, I guess we have somebody down Arden, a group in Arden. I asked Ted to check with,
I'm not real sure yet.
if people to call in.
I can move quick.
Yeah? I need to talk to Aaron today.
Yeah.
Broke it, keeps catching and everything.
Well, I think it's about that time.
Good morning, brethren. It's a pleasure and privilege to be with you this morning. The committee and I are grateful that you chose to spend this fine fall day with us. Now, as you know, the mission of the Academy of Masonic Knowledge is to try to promote understanding of the nature and purposes of the fraternity. And I'm happy to report that we have two gentlemen as speakers with us this morning who have devoted their lives to fulfilling that mission. So I think we have a very rewarding day of fellowship and enlightenment to look forward to. And in addition to welcoming you here with us in DK Auditorium, I'd also like to welcome those who are watching us on the internet, and specifically Cash Amount Horeb Lodge number 273. I understand that they've gotten together and are watching it as a group. And I'd also like to mention that our sound man, who has faithfully done sound for us for many, many years, Ray Simpson, is celebrating his 90th birthday today. So I think we ought to give Ray a hand. But before we begin, let's invoke the blessings of deity. May the favor of heaven be upon this lodge, and as it has happily begun, may it be conducted with order and closed in harmony. Amen. The flag ceremony. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So let me just go over the day's events here. So we'll be presenting certificates, and then we'll hear from Michael Poole, then we'll have some questions and answers, then we'll have a break for lunch, and then we'll hear from John Bridegroom. So now, as you know, to fulfill our mission for promoting the understanding of the nature and purpose of Freemasonry, not only do we hold meetings like this, but the members of the Academy of Masonic Knowledge have a chance to read and write Masonic texts and to attend and present at Masonic organizations. And as they do, they acquire Masonic education units and they progress through a number of stages to the level of a Master Masonic Scholar. And so at this point in our meeting, we like to recognize the progress that people have made towards that goal. And George Haynes will read the names of the people and the levels that they've achieved. And we'll hand out their certificates down below.
Thank you. Is that on? Okay. Completing actually levels 1 and levels 2 is Brother Mark Vincent Cruciani. If you could come up front, please, if you're here. Mark, or Vince, actually, is, I know Vince. It's not here. Then completing level 2 is Brother Eric Krogstedt. And Eric, if we could have you stand over here in a row, shoulder to shoulder. The fellows with the rifles are back there. Oh. So of our Master Masonic Scholars this time, which are not in alphabetical order. Completing the Master Masonic Scholar level, Brother William Britton. And Brother Michael Mocan. He's not here? Okay. And then one who told us he wasn't going to be here, we're going to mail him his certificate later. It's Brother Brian Wagner. Oh, he is. Okay, I was misinformed, which is not unusual. Brian, I just want to let you know that each of these levels constitutes 10 Masonic education units, but hours of reading, writing, evaluations of the reading, and rewriting often. So please give these brothers a round of applause. Thank you.
So part of our mission at the Academy, of course, is not only to study the nature and purpose of Freemasonry, but also to spread that knowledge with others. And I'm happy to report that some of our Master Masonic Scholars have gotten the work that they've done at the Academy accepted for publication. So Bill Britton had his paper, Dickens' Christmas Carol and His Relationship to Masonry, accepted for publication by Philalethes. Congratulations, Bill. Brian Wagner had his paper, Masonic Knights Templar Regalia History, accepted for publication by Michael Poll's Journal of the Masonic Research Society. And a member of our Academy, Michael Moran, had his paper, Masonic Reflections as it Applies to Masonic Education and Scholarship, also accepted by the Journal of the Masonic Society. So congratulations, Michael. Well, at this time, it's my great pleasure to introduce Michael Poll. Michael Paul, I'm sorry, I have to pronounce this, like Dahl, he said, not like Poll. So Michael Paul. Brother Michael Paul is the owner of Cornerstone Book Publishers and editor of the Journal of the Masonic Society. He's a fellow and past president of the Masonic Society, a fellow of the Philalethes Society, fellow of the Maine Lodge of Research, a member of the Society of Blue Friars, secretary of the Louisiana Lodge of Research, and full member of the Texas Lodge of Research. A New York Times best-selling writer and publisher, he is a prolific writer, editor, and publisher of Masonic and esoteric books. As time permits, he travels and speaks on the history of Freemasonry with a particular focus on the early history of the Scottish Rite. And if you want to hear any stories about Albert Pike, I think this guy is the world's best repository. But Brother Poll is going to speak with us this morning on the Enlightenment of Freemasonry. Brother Poll.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's really an honor and a privilege. And this is actually a couple of firsts for me. This is the first time I've ever been in Pennsylvania. I lived for 10 years in Virginia, but this is the first trip I've had to Pennsylvania, and I am absolutely enjoying it. And it's also the first time I've ever live streamed anywhere. And I've done a lot of videos, but I haven't live streamed anywhere. So what I understand, my family is tuning in, so I want to say hi to them. And the subject we're going to talk about is the Enlightenment of Freemasonry. And really, it's an extraordinarily subjective term. And what that means to any one person can differ greatly from what it means to someone else. And I want to explore a little bit about terms and what we use sometimes in Masonry. We're often said that the goal of Freemasonry is to take good men and make them better. But what does good mean and what does better mean? What it means to me may be completely different than you or the guy over there, the guy over there. We all have our own ideas of what things mean, what Freemasonry means. And when we step back and try to understand current situations that are taking place, I've heard for the last 20 years that we have declining membership. What are we to do? Well, we have Freemasonry. But what is Freemasonry? What does it mean to be a Freemason? Over the years, I know after World War II, there was a spike in membership in many jurisdictions. And this spike in membership caused a large number of Grand Lodges to realize that they had to make a change in how they operated to accommodate all these new members coming in. And it was necessary for them to build up the infrastructure of Freemasonry. And they had to accommodate all these new members. Grand Lodge office staff had to increase. They had to make adjustments in themselves. And I joined in the 1970s, and I know by the time that I joined, that spike was already starting to decline. And there was a loss of membership and a growing loss of membership. And everyone was looking, what do we do? Well, that's Freemasonry. But they were looking for membership drives, credit card policies, one-day classes, a whole spectrum of things to do. And one of the really amazing things that I saw come out of this was that there was another change that was taking place, and that was the change in the idea of many as to what the nature of Freemasonry was all about. And that change was, we're a club. We are here for fellowship and entertainment. What does enlightenment mean? Well, I had a senior warden some time back contact me and tell me that he knows that I talk a lot about education. And so if he becomes master of his lodge, he wanted to do something in the way of education. I said, well, that's a good thing. He said, I want to have lectures in the lodge on education. I said, okay. He became worshipful master of his lodge, and he invited me to the first lecture. He was giving it on plumbing. He was giving a lecture on how to do simple plumbing repairs in your house. I was kind of surprised, and he was all excited, and he said he was going to do a whole series of these type of education. And I said, well, you might want to start with Masonic education. I said, there's a full spectrum of Masonic subjects you might want to talk about. But then they flipped to another problem. And I really believe there's a balance issue that we need to face, because there was another young brother that came to me, and he was telling me that he was all interested in the deeper aspects of Freemasonry, and he wanted to know and teach the esoteric aspects. And so what he wanted to do was give a lecture in his lodge on understanding the Masonic ritual by means of alchemy. Good man becoming better, good man making them better. Basic alchemy, take something less precious, make it better. So he came to his lodge, and he basically pestered the older members of the lodge that he wanted to do an education program. And he told them what it was. They weren't sure what but because he was young and because he was interested, they allowed him to do it. So he gave his lecture on alchemy. Now this lodge, the membership for the last 20 years, they came in, they'd have maybe chili dogs, maybe spaghetti and meatballs, then they'd go up and they'd have an opening of the lodge, most of the time very poorly done. They'd have a reading of the minutes, pay bills, talk about who was sick, who died, what's coming up, then they'd have a closing, and they'd go home. And that was the extent of Masonry that they're experienced. So here's this young man coming in talking about alchemy. What in the world is he talking about? They had no clue as to what he was discussing, and they said, you're the problem. The problem is you. You're giving us something that has no meaning to us whatsoever. Don't ever do this. This is not what we need or want. Well, he was discouraged and he left. So where is the balance that we have to find for understanding what's expected of us? And I think one of the things we have to do is set certain definitions and understandings of who we used to be. Now, I know right now there's a large celebration going on for 300 years of speculative Masonry, and I know that there's a number of individuals who are arguing that it's not really 300 years, it's a little earlier, a little later. I'm not concerned so much with exact dates, but I'm concerned with the philosophy that was there. Freemasonry is set apart from other clubs like the JCs, the Red Cross, any good service club. By certain aspects, we teach by means of symbolism, and we initiate candidates. Those two elements you can take back not only to the beginning of speculative Masonry, certainly not only to the beginning of where we often say we come from, the operative Masons, but back to the earliest days of mankind. Early societies always looked at initiation as some sort of rite of passage or some sort of ceremony when something was important to be brought through. And teaching by symbols is a basic and extremely effective form of teaching, because you want to teach them this, and so you show them this, and it's something interesting, and it makes them remember what you're trying to teach them. But if you're very good at what you're doing, you can make this symbol like an onion with layers. So if you just start out and you understand this thing by this symbol, if you spend a little time, you may be able to dig deeper into the aspect and find this and this and this and this just by spending more time studying what you started out. So this form of education has been with us since the beginning of time. And then we take a step further. We go into the time where mankind was expanding and wanted to settle. We no longer wanted to just be out there hunting and traveling around. We wanted to settle in cities and build up cities. And humans being humans, what we did was we started building better buildings, better cities. And this gave birth to the old operative guilds that eventually developed. And they were often rumored to be a little more than just a building trade. And my belief, and I have nothing to back this up with, but my belief was that they practiced something that was based on an earlier group. You see, when these cities first started building up, there was one group, the merchants. A group in one city or town needed things. Maybe they needed spices or clothing. The merchants would come and they'd travel from place to place. And a merchant would come into town. Not only would they bring different spices or clothing or whatever materials they were selling, they also brought something more valuable. That was news and information. A little town was usually isolated. They lived here, and most of the people stayed in where they were. But now these merchants were coming in, and they were telling them stories about what happened here, what happened there, all over the places that they traveled, and they enjoyed this. This was a good thing for them. So they looked forward to merchants coming into town. They weren't pestering them by any means. They would gather, and they would learn, and then the merchants would travel to another town, the same thing. They'd take news from what happened here. So there was value in what they were offering. So by the time the operatives came in, they basically, this was their livelihood. It was how they earned a living. They were builders. And so they would travel from place to place to find out wherever there was a job that they could earn a living. And they were Freemasons. They were free-born. And that does not mean born free. That means free-born, the old form of the word. They were free to pick up their tools and travel wherever they wanted. They would travel around, and the same situation as old merchants would take place. They would go into a town. Now, they would build and do their construction, and they had their secrets because that was job protection. But these operative masons would finish work, and then they'd gather around. And there was no television for them to watch. There was no internet or going out on cell phones or going to the movie theater. They gathered around a campfire, looked up at the stars, and they talked. They told stories to each other. And here is where I believe they would share with whoever would come in with them news, information, theories. They began expanding into something much more than just workers who were building something. They developed not only an education by the simple fact of learning what was going on in different areas, they expanded on philosophy. They applied things, music. Music has mathematics involved. That's beneficial to builders. They were trying to be as good as they could be and as artistic as they could be. They had an appreciation for things, even if they couldn't do it. They would understand what somebody else was doing, and they'd try to apply that. So these operative masons existed, and they were themselves of value to the various communities that they would travel to. Now, by the time of the Renaissance, and again, it's going to be general dates, because we can argue all day about dates, but there was a change in society, and the building trade was going down. And again, with no evidence whatsoever other than logic, we know that speculative Freemasonry began. But why did it begin? My belief is that there was a realization that these operative Masons would no longer be an influence in society. And individuals who had no desire whatsoever to be actual builders saw value in the secondary aspect of these operatives, and that was what they had to teach. Now, when speculative Freemasonry began, I believe they built upon some of the operative practices. Music, for example. Music was always a part of the old operative lodges. In the day, I mean, speculative lodges. In the operative lodges, music would have been a very difficult thing to do because you would have had to have musicians there. Today, you might go out to a work site and you hear workers listening to a boom box. But back then, they couldn't do that. But speculative Masonry, however, was able to translate what they were doing into their lodge setting by bringing in music. And that, like everything else, evolved. It has all but disappeared today, but for a time it was a very important aspect that was used in initiations. But these early guys who were developing the speculative system, they understood the importance of initiation. They understood that what it did was it was by no means an end-all. It was the equivalent of you get an initiation, it opens a door for you. And it's your responsibility if you walk through that door. And if an individual received many different degrees in all different systems, then many doors would open for him. It doesn't mean that he actually walked into the rooms and benefited by these doors being open. It simply meant that the doors were opened. And today we face a problem where many individuals receive many, many different degrees and have many doors open for them, but because there's no desire or no knowledge that you need to step out and go into the rooms that these degrees provide for you through these doors, they lose out. Why even bother? So what we have today is a concept that we have a system of Freemasonry that is far more important than what we often realize. And what do we do with it? Well, my belief is that we have an opportunity. No matter what we do, each day is going to pass. And we're going to get older, and changes are going to take place, and there's nothing we can do to stop these changes. And the changes are sometimes beneficial, sometimes they're not beneficial. But one of the hallmarks of human beings is that we have the ability to hope. And I hope that a lot of what I'm seeing with the young brothers is going to translate into actually walking into more doors, and that we start taking advantage of what we teach. Enlightenment is not a degree. It's not, okay, I'm now enlightened, so now what do I do? I believe it's a process, and it's a lifelong process. It's something that we have to do every day. We have to understand, and believe me, the symbolism in Masonry, I defy anybody to believe that they can learn all there is to know about Masonry in one lifetime. There is such an opportunity for us to advance ourselves. And the goal is simply make someone better. The alchemy of Masonry. Take something less, take something that's basically good or basically acceptable and improving it. And we can do that with our own lives. But we can't do it. Now, the Scottish Rite, I belong to a Scottish Rite craft lodge in New Orleans. And they make a point in their teaching that there's three bad guys, and they refer to them by three human failings. It's ignorance, falsehood, and ambition. And if you think about the problems that we have in Masonry, ignorance is simply when we don't know something. And if we don't know something, we're not capable of doing things that we need to do. Falsehoods are often brought about because we're ignorant of something. Maybe we're ignorant of the truth of something, and so we believe a falsehood. But ambition is the great killer of everything. If we succumb to ambition, and it's usually always tied to ignorance and falsehood, then we lose everything. We take something that can be extraordinarily positive, and we destroy it. And we do that because we're ignorant, and we've accepted falsehoods, and we want whatever the other guy has. What do? We start with ourselves. We look inward, and we start to say, this is what I can do. This is what I can do for myself. I need to improve this or this or this, and I take every day with a step, and I try to make personal advancements. I try to understand, am I enlightened? Do I need to do some improvement on me? I need to be honest with myself. And step by step, if we can do this individually, and then if we can encourage lodges to do this, step by step by step, it spreads, and we start improving. And we can't look at the other guy and say, well, you're the cause of this problem. We have to look internally. If our leaders are not doing what we really know they should be doing, then we still have to look inwards. We can't change another person. We can't make somebody else do something. And if everything falls apart on us, then we have enough confidence in ourselves and realize that we have the ability to rebuild things. And that's what we need to do. And I believe that the enlightenment of Freemasonry is simply the recognition that we do count, and we have to keep advancing. And by doing that, I think we've earned our wages. I appreciate everything.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Any questions?
Well, why don't we take a short break, and then we'll come back for questions. So you could have gone for another hour, actually.
I didn't think 2 hours. I thought you was 45 minutes or half hour.
Yeah, right, but we're good here, so.
I don't know who might keep track of it, but this is just a printed copy.
Oh, okay.
If you want to have it, I've got one I'll speak from. This
All right,
is for
thank you,
your
John.
records, so.
That's good. So have you published this anyplace
No,
before?
I wrote it for this, so.
So one thing we've discussed doing is publishing this in the transactions of the Pennsylvania Lodge of Masonry.
Sure.
So do you have plans to publish it someplace else?
No, it's all yours.
Okay. Well,
If you like it. If you
okay.
don't like it, let me know. I'll pop it somewhere
I'll
else.
see if we can get this in the transaction.
Nice job, Mike. Nice job. I'm
Okay.
enamored at your ability to be able to just speak like that. I can't
So
just
it's a
off the cuff
right
like that.
It's not off the cuff. I got to memorize it.
Oh, jeez. Wow. That's even more impressive.
I can't read the speech.
Right.
Okay.
I have to memorize. Sure.
I told him we wanted to take some photos so we could put it in the news section of the journal. So. Sure.
Okay.
Oh, want us together? All right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to kiss him.
I know. Yeah, yeah. So. All right.
Well, that's agreed. Oh, okay. No, so, well, you could have gone longer. So we're going to have lunch. Okay, sounds good. All right. Give long answers. Okay.
Yesterday was my values as well. You know, in the future I'll be. Isn't it striking too, where these guys who don't come on, too long to drive, And actually, that was my whole point to him. He had been talking for 4 or 5 years. I'll get to hide behind a PowerPoint a little bit. You know, everybody will be looking at those pictures. They won't be looking at me.
You're supposed to sit here then, imagine. Huh?
What's that?
You'll be probably sitting here.
Oh, I don't know. You can stay there. Six, one half dozen the other. They're going to move all this, I guess. What they're going to do is they're going to rearrange this because I'm guessing the screen comes down in the middle. So after lunch, they were going to move the podium over to the side, I think, so that I'll be over there.
How's she doing?
She's doing very, very well. She actually, they're flying out on Sunday because her checkup in Philadelphia is Monday. So I drove out. They're going to fly out. I'm going to pick them up at the airport and then drive us all home after the checkup. But hopefully everything will go well. But she's doing really good. She's back in school, and she just had cataract surgery on one of her eyes. She was pretty advanced cataracts as a side effect of one of her medications, and they're scheduled to do the other eye. I think it was maybe November 13th or something. So that'll be a big change for her because she's been struggling seeing in school, but she takes it all in stride. I mean, she's got to be mostly blind, I would think, but she doesn't even faze her, and she's just happy to be doing what she's doing. And she's playing the violin in school, which I would have never thought could have happened, So
You never understand why things happen. Sometimes it's great lessons, and usually sometimes spiritual coming out to teach.
sure, yeah. Yeah, and I've come to learn, I mean, especially when you're in something like that, and you see all the other families going through their versions of it, because you sort of get thrust into that world all of a sudden. And you just kind of realize there's everybody has some challenge that they're going through and dealing with, and it's real easy to get lost and depressed and self-pity and why did this happen to me and why are we dealing with it? But at the end of the day, everybody's got something, and it's all relative because I could say, oh, cancer's the worst thing ever, but the worst thing in your life is the worst thing in your life, no matter what it is, right? So it's all relative. And I used to think to myself all the time, right after Phoenix got sick, we'd see people posting on Facebook about how distraught they were that their dog died or their dog was sick, and I would be really angry, and I would be like, why, how could they even feel that way when people are going through this? But then I realized it's the worst thing that they've ever dealt with, and that's their closest companion or whatever it is, and I'm sure, pain and loss and grief are the same no matter how you go through them, so. Necessarily went there. I don't know what they expected because I feel like we started at least a half hour early because I think the paper said that you were supposed to start at 10 and go to 10:45 or something, and we started at like 4 after 9 instead.
Yeah, I was kind of concerned.
Something, right?
I tried to read the speech once, and I sounded like an idiot. So that's what I have to do usually a couple days ahead of time. I just memorize it.
Yeah.
I know what it's
Yeah.
See, that's what I tease a lot about. Art has a photographic memory. You can read something,
I memorize ritual, it's visual, and I'm sure it's because I'm a visual person, and as a graphic designer, that's just how I kind of see things I organize things with my mind in a visual way, and so when I'm doing ritual, I know the page break, because what I'm looking at is I'm reading an image in my brain, so. And I do the same thing, like when I was going through the line of my lodge, the way I learned all of the ritual is I would go up to the lodge room by myself, and I would pretend like the room was full of the officers, and I would, everywhere I had to stand up or get down on the floor, I would do it all, so that I had this sort of mental movie of where I was supposed to go, so that then when I was doing it, that's how I knew where I was supposed to be at any given time, is I had this image in my head of what my view of the lodge room was, or, that kind of thing, so.
Our speakers are plotting against us.
That's right, yeah. We're about to overthrow everything.
Sometimes that wouldn't be a bad idea. Throw everything out, start.
Now the portion of it, a chunk of it, Charles going to survive. Some class I'm going over. That time I said, when you started, you started early.
Right.
Yeah, we use the same schedule that we did 16 years ago. Changed slightly.
Right.
That's the Masonic way to do things.
Well, it's all a suggestion.
We got a pretty decent crowd today. I was worried, like, in the parking lot, thinking of parking lot close to the building I usually do. A couple other activities in the area.
That's what happens when you get big names like Mike Poll. It brings them in, right?
Yeah, we were thinking maybe some spelling things so that we can
And I had no idea. It's pronounced Paul?
It's like
I
a
didn't know that.
Well, most people who see my name first, they'll always mispronounce it. But here, but it's pronounced like D-O-L-L, Doll.
Right.
And don't ask me why, but that's what my daddy always told me.
That's interesting, yeah.
I've just been inside. We can be heard over the internet.
The world's always listening.
Oh. I don't know what you're saying. Yeah, I edited out that show. Because that's a great
Yeah, right.
Test one, test one, test one. Test one. Okay. Okay, you were. Yeah. Hey, Wag.
Actually wanted to hold this book. The men who still but, and the reason for
Wag.
this is
I'm going to switch sides. I'm on that side.
and so, and in fact, they said they had bigger. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah. He's also So if the members of the committee could please come forward, we can begin our question and answer period. So do we have our 2 traveling microphones? Okay, well, looks like we're good. So this is your opportunity to ask Brother Michael Paul questions about his talk. So when you stand up to be recognized, our traveling microphones will bring the microphone to you. If you would give us your name and the number of the lodge that you belong to. And Paul Fisher always used to remind us that this is a time to get answers from our speaker, not to give long opinions or express your grievances or anything like that. So please make your questions short and sweet. Direct them to Brother Paul. And people on the internet are also free to ask questions as well. And as they come in, we'll direct them to Brother Paul as well. So we're ready for the first question. Down here.
Good morning. My name is Chris Muller. I'm from Erie, Pennsylvania, at the Perry Keystone Lodge 392. Very short question. You emphasize that leadership has a very important driver in doing Masonic education. Do you have any suggestions how that driver should be formulated, and what would be effective to do that top down?
From a leader's standpoint, you mean? Well, from a leadership standpoint, I believe that what we need to do, a leader has to understand all aspects of the lodge, really. And if you're going to work the chairs, one of the problems that I've seen, especially in a lodge that's hurting for membership, is someone will join the lodge, and if they show any indication that they are either proficient with ritual, or if they have a desire to work or any interest, they'll immediately be put in the chairs. And I've seen some young men who are masters of their lodge only a few years after joining, and they really have no experience in lodge leadership. They don't understand what the lodge truly is. Their first experience many times is as soon as they were put in the office. And I believe that seasoning, it's going to take a while, I believe, to recover from some of the problems. We have what it seems like there was a period of time when individuals joining Masonry were not given what they should have been given. And the result is you have people who have been around for a while, but they don't really learn much about what Masonry is all about. And they believe that Masonry is strictly a business meeting. And so that's their understanding, and so that's what they take with them into leadership positions. So I believe that there has to be a recognition that you first have to change. He's often credited with saying this, and I don't know if he actually did say it, but Albert Einstein is quoted as saying that a definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. And it's true. If your lodge is failing, then you got to turn around and look at everything that's been going on, or even if it's having problems, look at everything that's happening and for the last dozen or so years, and if you see the same thing that's happening, you got to do something different because it's not working. And it doesn't matter that this is the way it's always been done. If something is not working, then it's not working. And you may have to go back and do a little research and digging, what were they doing 100 years ago? How was Masonry done then? How was, what was going on? Does Masonry have to be big? Is it necessary that we have massive building? Maybe we can do the same thing on a smaller scale. It's all questions that we all have to ask, and the leaders have got to be able to understand what they have. They have to understand Masonry. They have to understand the ritual. They have to understand the laws. They have to understand government of the lodge, and that doesn't happen quickly. You can't expect someone brand new to understand all of this. And I believe that without competent leaders, we're sunk.
Another question? Down front here.
Matt Wrigley, Warren Lodge, number 310. Hi, Brother Poll. My question is in regard to the story you told about the newer member who came in and gave a presentation on alchemy. Mm-hmm. My question is just, in my personal experience in reading, I found that alchemy has a lot of similarities to Masonry, and I would think it would be something that would be well received. So, in your opinion, do you think that the reason he just wasn't taken in a friendly manner, in a sense, is that he tried to force it just as an alchemy only and perhaps didn't tie into Masonry? In other words, if he tied his discussion into Masonry and into the relevance of Masonic knowledge, or the relevance of its principles for the lodge and stuff like that, do you think it would have been better received, or is it just the...
Yeah, I think that there was a problem on both ends. You see, and this is what I mean about balance. Masonry seems to have going in two different directions right now. And you have Masons who have been around for a while, who have not received any education. They don't understand a subject such as alchemy. They view that as booga booga nonsense or magic, some terrible thing, and it has nothing whatsoever to do. They don't understand that when you say make a good man better, or make someone better than what they are today, that means alchemy. That's the alchemical process, and broken down to the basic things. You could take a base metal and you could do something to make it, improve it. Now that's the theory. But the philosophy behind it, I believe that was absolutely what the very early speculative Masons used. And I believe the young man failed by not realizing that these men had never experienced anything like this. And he should have introduced it in a way that accommodated them and realized it, because this is one of the things in Masonic education. What we need to do is to start at the basics. Understand that a lot of times people have absolute, and it doesn't matter their office that they hold or their rank or anything, they may be have missed the basic teachings. So you have to start at the bottom, or else you risk insulting them. You could do something that they say, well, who does he think he is? He's being a show-off. He's trying to make me look bad. So there's got to be a recognition on one hand that some young guys may have some good ideas, but there's also the young guys got to realize, well, maybe these older guys, they're not doing exactly what they need to do to keep it for the future, but they have been keeping it going, even if it's only on life support. They have been able to keep something going. And so there's got to be a respect for each and an understanding that you've got to find the middle ground and the balance and teach these important things, but maybe take baby steps first. You don't teach trigonometry before you teach arithmetic, how to add.
We have a question from the internet, and I'm going to hazard a guess that Jonathan Paul of Perfect Union Lodge number 1 in Louisiana may be a relation of yours. His question for you is, what is the first step for improving a struggling Masonic lodge? What would be the first thing you would do?
Try to understand what's going on in the lodge, why it's failing, what's going on around the area with the members in the various lodges around it. And the first step to correct it is to want to correct it and recognize that there's a problem. A problem too many lodges have is that they are under the impression that everything they're doing is exactly right and the problems have nothing to do with them. It's external. And they're just victims of something that they can't control. And once that you develop that mindset, there's no improving anything because you don't recognize that there's a problem. And by the time the floor hits you in the face, everything's over, and you no longer have a lodge. So you first have to recognize that something's wrong, and then take whatever steps is necessary for that particular problem. If there's no members, why are there no members? What are we doing? It's not productive or not interesting or not Masonry. And then you take it from that, again, in baby steps. You start having education programs. You begin teaching the basics. I've seen many lodges where Grand Lodge officers come in and they have absolutely no idea even how to, the correct titles for the Grand Lodge officers. I've seen individuals joking around, kidding around. Visitor comes in, and I've seen people just laughing, trying to introduce them, and it's very disrespectful to the individual. It's very disrespectful to everyone, but it's all a problem in not understanding the very basics.
In the back there?
Good morning, Justin Edling from Valley Lodge 797 up in Valley View, Pennsylvania. Brother Paul, thank you for coming out. It was a great lecture. It was very enlightening to a young Mason like myself. Probably like a three-part question. The first is, in your research, you mentioned a spike after World War II. Was there any why behind that? Did we find a reason behind it, or was it just a bunch of young men that maybe networked the military? I don't know. And then also, I think that with the installation of a new Grand Master, and I know in my experience, our December meeting is always well attended in the lodge with installation of officers and such. Do you have any advice on how to harness that enthusiasm that comes at the close and beginning of new leadership to not only, I think, number one, retain members? That's some of the time, the only time I see some members, but also maybe to recruit new as we enter a new phase of leadership in the lodge. Thank you.
Before Brother Paul gets a chance to answer that, I should mention we do have our next Grand Master with us, Right Worshipful Deputy Grand Master Gene Harrett, as a member of our committee and makes all this possible. So I think he deserves a round of applause. We're looking forward to your installation, Brother Gene.
Thank you.
Well, as to the first part of your question, I don't know that there's an absolute answer that can be proven, but I'll tell you what I think. I know prior to World War II, there was a depression, a Great Depression in the United States. Prior to that, there was World War I. Following World War II, from what I remember my parents telling me, was that there was almost a sigh of relief that trouble was over. The horrible war was over. And there was a desire for entertainment. They wanted to be light. They were tired of struggling. You know, I heard stories during the Depression of coupons. You had to have a coupon to buy sugar. You couldn't, if you could get sugar, you couldn't get meat. You couldn't get this. You couldn't. It was a lot of struggling during that time. And there seemed to have been a feeling that they just wanted to do something. I know in my Grand Lodge, at that time, they had the Grand Lodge building was in New Orleans. And what they would do is they had on the second floor was a large dining hall. And in the basement, they had a swimming pool, an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So it became a family event. The whole family would come out and they'd go to the dining hall and they'd have dinner. And then the wives and the children would go down to the swimming pool. The men would go up to the lodge. So it became a family event. So Masonry was almost secondary to a family entertainment event. And there was a desire to have fun, to do things that were light, entertaining, and enjoyable. Unfortunately, right following that, they had this amazing invention that came out called a television. I remember back I was a kid in the 50s when TV first started coming out. Well, all of a sudden, there was this desire for entertainment, and they could find it in Masonry. And then all of a sudden, there were new types of entertainment. And so the spike, I believe, came when there was a desire. I know the Shrine Circus was something that, you know, everyone wanted to go see. It was, again, entertainment. And the focus, I believe, went so much to entertainment that when better entertainment came out, the television, you know, maybe there's a new restaurant, maybe the cook at the lodge, you got tired of the cook that meal, you want to go to another restaurant. So I believe it was the focus from Masonry to a desire to be entertained and fellowship that caused the increase in membership, but then the same reason caused a decrease when better entertainment came around. And somehow in the process, Masonry became lost. We stopped practicing Masonry, we stopped teaching Freemasonry, and the result of that was what we have today.
You had some more parts to your question. You can take the microphone.
I'm sorry, I forget.
No problem at all. Thank you. That was a good answer. The second part was, come December, we install our new officers. Sometimes it's the one meeting that I see members at for a year. Do you have any thoughts or advice on how to harness that energy and that enthusiasm that want to be around the lodge in one particular month, moving forward with a new master of the lodge and new leadership, to try and keep those folks around through the year?
Every time there's a change, there's an opportunity. Every new worshipful master, every new grand master, every position, there's an opportunity for a change. There's an opportunity for improvement. There's an opportunity to take everything that was done good in the past and use it and build on it, and everything that was not as successful to kind of push that aside. There's always the opportunity. The only question is always, will it happen and will it be done? And yes, every new worshipful master that comes in, he should have had his plan a year or two earlier as to what he's going to do. He needs to be able to say, I want to have this, I want to have this. Maybe circumstances out the blue happen that you can't control that'll deny the ability to do something. But you've got to be able to say, I want this to happen, I want this to happen, I want this to happen. And the membership of the lodges have to understand, especially if a lodge is not in good shape, that maybe the lodge is in bad shape because they were not doing things that were different. And so they shouldn't fight something that is different. You should welcome a change, even if it's something that you don't agree with at the time. If you're going to die, maybe it's better the lodge die quickly than a long, dragged-out death. So I believe every change presents an opportunity, and it's what we do with it that's going to determine success or not.
We have another internet-based question from Brother Brian Maddox, who I believe is with the group down in Ardmore at Cache Mount Horeb Lodge. What is your most well-received Masonic education piece, and are there educational themes that perform better than others in terms of engaging the brethren?
Well, I do a YouTube channel that New Orleans Scottish Rite College, and the one with the highest numbers is one that is titled, What is the Highest Masonic Degree? And that one is just explaining that degrees, basically what I said in there, degrees open doors. And our degree structure does not mean that one degree is better than another. It just simply means you've experienced something more, you have another opportunity, but it doesn't translate into better any more than the number 6 translates into better than the number 2. It's just a progression, and it's an addition an additional opportunity. And I think more people have to realize that degrees and honors and offices are a responsibility and a requirement to serve, not just an ego boost and an honor. You can get a lot of honors in Masonry. There's all kind of things that you can get, all kind of degrees, all kind of offices, all kind of pins and medallions that you can get. But for me, the absolute best thing that can ever happen to me is when I get a brand new Mason and say, gee, I appreciate this. This helped me out. I understand this now. Our job is to serve. We're supposed to teach. So anything that we can do and anything that anyone can do to help the young guys understand who we are and what we are is what's going to, in my opinion, count.
So I wonder, Michael, if this would be a good time for you to explain in general what the Masonic Society is and what it does. I mean, you have a number of educational programs. You publish a journal. You organize conferences. You actually have a education program that people can go through. Could you explain a little bit of that?
The Masonic Society School, we did a non-video series that was designed to basically understand Masonry, and I was not involved in the leadership of that. I was just simply the host for the series. I wrote the videos and did the videos, but the journal itself, what we're trying to do is, when the Masonic Society was created, it was designed to fill a particular notch and not step on anything else. And that notch, the original design of the journal was to be the Time magazine. It wasn't to be a totally scholarly publication. It was to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I believe that one of the key things that young Masons need to do is write and express themselves. That's one of the trade-offs I've seen with American Masonry. We spend so much time memorizing ritual, and there's a value in that because of the process of if something is going to be of value, you've got to work for it. Anything that you are just given without working for it is of little value. So I believe that learning ritual, if you have nothing else, then learning ritual is at least doing something to justify what you've gotten. But I believe that writing papers in Europe, this is they explain. This is what this means. This symbolism. This was what this means. This is what I understand. And then it goes through a challenge period in the lodge where they are challenged. Well, what do you mean by this? Explain what this means. And I think if we get our young guys writing stuff down, that forces them to think about it. And by writing it down and thinking about it, it develops into being part of their psyche. And they will understand a little bit more about Masonry, and it will carry with them rather than being a tape recorder or a parrot. At least that's my opinion. And that's Masonic Society's trying to make that available. We are not looking for professional writers always. We're looking for pretty much anybody who's got something interesting or a story to tell.
Good morning, I guess it still is. Ryan Steele, University Lodge 51, young member. So my question is going to have that perspective. You've talked about a couple of discrete things, but I imagine that there is a lot more of a spectrum to the answer here, and that the right balance is probably the secret formula to recruitment and retention that we're all seeking. You've talked about this idea of like a hallway of open doors, and I like that metaphor. There's a whole bunch of doors that you could go through, and some people don't take the step through the doorway. But then you've also talked about how issues in the past have come from throwing guys into it too quickly, one-day classes, maybe turning people off, putting people right in the chairs. I like that kind of stuff too, but I'm wondering, for a young member that has all of these doors open on either side of them, what do you think is the right balance for getting involved and finding what Masonry actually means?
Well, there's an old thought about initiation, and again, it's an old thought. the thought for that an initiation is either valid or it's not valid, and there are certain elements that are needed for an initiation, and it doesn't matter if it's in Masonry or what the society. There's a lot of initiatic organizations. You've got to have a desire to be initiated. You have to have a desire to initiate, and you have to have a proper setting. The desire to be initiated is satisfied in Masonry by the common Masonic practice of requiring the candidate or the petitioner to ask to join. If you go approach someone yourself and say, hey, I want you to be a Mason, then that's already, he hasn't expressed a desire to be initiated, so the concept of a valid initiation is going to be compromised right at the beginning. The concept of desire to initiate is satisfied with the ballot. The lodge ballots on a candidate. It's not automatic. They have to ballot on a candidate, and they say, yes, we want to initiate this candidate. The proper setting is the decorum of the lodge during the initiation. A one-day initiation, I cannot say that a valid initiation cannot happen in that time, because in my opinion, a valid initiation is when you feel something inside of you, when you feel like, hey, this really hit me, something is here. And but it seems like it's less of an opportunity, and even a valid initiation can be completely wasted if you have someone in any degree and you have people yelling out corrections or laughing and talking, or worst of all, making fun of a candidate, or anything that breaks the mood. There should be a solemn mood, and in the mind of the candidate and in the mind of every single person there, that this is something important. And you can't have talking on the sidelines or chattering or discussions of everything. So what makes a valid initiation? I don't believe that a one-day class is impossible to achieve, but from my experience of human nature, it seems like it makes it a little harder. I would take each initiation as a very important thing and a responsibility on the part of the lodge and on the part of the candidate, if that in any way answers you.
Brother Poll, I am Ken Womack from Carlisle Lodge number 260 in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and I'm declaring myself a young Mason too. A few years ago, the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania removed the term freeborn from the ritual for an entered apprentice Mason's degree. I was intrigued by your discussion of that term this morning and wondered if you would expound on it. And do you think it's appropriate in the ritual, and is it still used in other jurisdictions that you're aware of?
It's used in many jurisdictions, and it's unfortunately one of the problems. And there's certain, I believe there's certain facts that have to be faced. The term was there, born was an old English term meant to carry. And that's what the old operatives did. Someone who was a slave or a bondsman or in any way where he couldn't travel from place to place, they couldn't be a Mason because that was part of the job. They had to be able to travel. And they could care less if someone was born into slavery. If they were free at that moment to be able to do something, then that was the requirement. It would be naive and I really believe deceptive if we did not face that there was racial bigotry in the United States Masonry for a long, long time, and probably, and without question, still exists in a lot of people's minds. And I believe that that term was, I don't want to get into anybody's mind, but it'd be very easy for it to be deliberately misunderstood to mean born free. And that has implications that would mean that if you were born into, and especially years ago, if you were born into slavery, that's it, you can never be a Mason. Or if anyone, maybe your parent was born into, or your grandparent, or anyone, they could trade. And justification is a very convenient tool that people use to be able to do pretty much whatever they want. And I believe that this is one of the areas that we have to either face or choose to ignore. And if we choose to ignore, then it's going to come back and bite us. But it's not for me to say what any jurisdiction does or does not do. And myself, I prefer not to remove it, but to properly explain it, so that it's understood and it cannot be corrupted into something that it's not, if that answers you.
Down here. Let's see, we have I was, but then he went backwards, so.
My name is Wayne Baggett. I'm from State College number 700. And I have a sort of a trivia question. I'm going to go from the forest down to a little specific tree. In terms of Scottish Rite background, do you know anything about the origin of the term Lodge of Perfection? Where did that come from?
In what we know as the Scottish Rite, when we say Scottish Rite, it is automatically assumed to be the 33-degree system that was created in 1801 in Charleston. The Rite of Perfection was used also in the older systems that predated what we have as a 33-degree Scottish Rite system. There was a Rite of Perfection, but there was trying to pull back from memory, there was a number of organizations that sought the quest, and it's a very difficult philosophical question, because no one in this room can imagine that they're going to be perfect at any time. And so if it's a misunderstanding when you say the Rite of Perfection. The implication is that you're going to join this and you're going to learn how to be perfect. But I believe that in its origin, the quest was always, and it's the same thing as the basic Masonic philosophy of good to better. You're going to always try to shoot for perfection. And what, you always, it was mentioned, I'm not sure where the past couple of days I've heard, but someone mentioned that there was always, the old operatives would do something a little off, because they said only God is perfect. And it's true that we can't assume that we can ever reach perfection. And I do not believe that any of the early orders, which the Scottish Rite built on, are numerous old groups and philosophies, that any of them ever really believed that they could reach perfection. And it was always a continuous process of enlightenment, or a continuous process of seeking perfection, but with the realization that you could only be realistically improving rather than perfection as the final goal. If that.
Yes, back in the back there.
Hi, I'm Brian McCollum from Plum Creek Monroeville Lodge number 799 in Plum, Pennsylvania. When we talk about struggling lodges and membership, do you think our focus should be more on bringing more members in, or creating something that makes them want to join and come on their own?
There was an old movie, it was not an old movie, but there was a movie, Field of Dreams. And they said, if you build it, they will come. And I really believe that if you have a lodge that's doing what it should be doing, it certainly doesn't have to advertise. It may not have a massive amount of numbers, but if you're doing what's right, it's going to attract the right people. And I don't like gimmicks to bring in people. I don't like twisting people's arms or doing anything. You know, you can't drop all standards and just say, everybody come on in, and the only qualification is that your check don't bounce. That's not what we're about, and I think that is the perfect formula for absolute destruction down the line. And I believe that we have to keep our standards where they are, learn what it means to be a Mason, operate our lodges properly, and by doing that, I think we're going to solve most of the problems, because let's face it, I really believe that we're in a time where we very well may see the failure of not only a number of lodges all over, we could see failure of some Grand Lodges. I don't imagine there'll be many, but as many wouldn't want it. But, or if not the failure of Grand Lodges, a conversion into simply a club. And just to keep it alive, and this is where we may end up seeing splits, and we could see divisions, multiple Grand Lodges splitting. I expect to see within the next dozen or so years a lot of changes. And I think the final goal is simply to bring Masonry back to Masonry. And there's going to be Masonic lodges that are really doing what they should be doing. There's going to be Grand Lodges that's going to be doing what they should be doing. And there's going to be some that are social clubs, and that's all they are. So.
Down front here.
I don't know if this is working. Yeah, I guess it is. First, let me thank the committee for all the work you do all year. Brother Mike, thanks for coming up. It's a pleasure to have you. My concern is about the education that we talk about. Since I've been a Mason, when you talk about education, you're equating it to ritual education. Many of our lodges are falling apart today because the officers don't understand the Constitution, the Digest of Decisions, or even the bylaws of their own lodges. Just what is your feeling on whether there should be more instruction on the jurisprudence of the Grand Lodges?
Yes. On several levels. If you don't understand, when you say Masonic education, it's the whole ball of wax. It's everything. It's understanding not only the words, but what the words mean. It means understanding the bylaws of your lodge. It understands me. It doesn't help if somebody has posted, and really, this is another pet peeve of mine, is when young Masons get online and they ask a jurisdiction-specific question on the internet. And they say, how do you do this? And someone will come in with a perfectly correct answer for their jurisdiction, but it might be completely wrong for yours. You see, you have to, large officers have to understand not only their ritual and the symbolism of Masonry, but they have to understand the laws of their lodge and their jurisdiction. And the best place to do that is in classes in the lodge. And the problem that's been coming is when there's no one in the lodge competent to answer their questions, and they get on the internet. And then they get someone who is maybe a Grand Lodge officer, or someone who is a past this or that and the other thing, and they say things that are absolutely correct, but then the young man takes it back to his lodge and he gets in trouble because he's doing something that's not appropriate in his jurisdiction. And it's all because he couldn't get the answers in his lodge, and so he goes somewhere else. And then this individual, if this individual happened to be a lodge officer or worshipful master of the lodge, and he's doing something because he was told by someone on the internet that is correct, then he could there could be a lot of ramifications for that. A number of years ago, as far as jurisprudence, I was shocked. This was a good number of years ago now, when I saw book lists, recommended book lists, and there were several jurisdictions that were listing Robert's Rules of Order. And I said, that's terrible, because Robert's Rules of Order is exactly what's needed for a club, but there's so much in there that is wrong for a Masonic Lodge. It's absolutely wrong. Worshipful Master says this is what happens. We're ending the discussion. Discussion's ended. Robert's Rules will tell you there's a way to overrule it by vote of the membership. Well, that doesn't happen in Masonry. Well, that spurred me on to do a revision of Robert's Rules of Order, so I ended up doing a Masonic edition. That's a general guide of more Masonic practices. But there's a lot of these things that are happening that we're applying things to Masonry that don't apply, or we're taking the good information for another jurisdiction and applying it to ours, if that helps.
Down front here.
Thank you. My name's Walter Daniels. I'm from Eureka West Shore Lodge 302 in Mechanicsburg. I have a few years of experience. This is my 57th year being a Mason. So many of these other fellows have been expressed to be much younger. I've been very active in Masonic education for most of my Masonic life. Chairman of Masonic Ed in my lodge and a few other things. And just to give you an idea where I'm coming from, my question is this. The other day we had a officers' rehearsal for degree work, and I mentioned today's meeting of the Academy. Anybody like to go to the Academy? A couple of them didn't even know what the Academy was, mixing it up with the Lodge of Pennsylvania Lodge of Research. My question, did anybody want to go to the Academy on Saturday? And the response was pretty much everybody yawned. So I'm at a loss, and have been for many years. How do we get Masons to be interested in improving their Masonic knowledge? It just doesn't seem there's any interest once they get a degree or join this body or that body, really understanding anything about Masonry. I'm sure there's no magic wand that we can wave to get people interested in learning something about Masonry.
I tell you, I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to play basketball, and I was tall. I was horrible. I couldn't do it, and so I never made a career. Freemasonry is not for everyone. There's a concept that everyone can be a Freemason. I absolutely don't believe it. There is an old Rosicrucian thought that either you have always been a Rosicrucian or you never will be one. And I believe that applies to Freemasonry as well. And everyone cannot do it, and it doesn't mean that it's wrong. I happen to like strawberry ice cream, and I know there's other people who like chocolate ice cream. I don't particularly care for it. I have that right. It's the same with Masonry. And the problem we've had over the years is that we've been bringing in people who should never have been brought in. And it's not their fault. It's not like they're a bad person or anything, but they just simply, their desire is not in this line. And when one person who comes in and doesn't have the desire or the inclination or interest, but he does enjoy fellowship. he does enjoy coming, maybe whether your lodge meets once a month, twice a month, whatever the meeting time, he comes and visits with his friends for a few days. Well, he ends up being an officer. And then he brings in a friend of his with exactly the same idea. They're not going to be interested in this. And we have to realize that there is going to be a number of Masons who simply do not care about this. They're nice guys. They will help you out anytime you want, but they don't care about this aspect of Freemasonry. And after a while, if you keep pushing these people, they'll get angry and they'll see you as the problem rather than that. And the problem is simply guys in the past who didn't guard the West Gate properly. And it's true. And we have to realize that there's going to be a division in Masonry. And they're all going to be guys who have no indication or inclination of leaving, who simply want nothing of the real knowledge or value of Freemasonry. They want the club atmosphere. They want this. They want only fellowship. And that's what they're going to do. And we may see lodges that going this way, lodges that are strictly clubs. And I don't know that we can change the mind, or if we should change the mind of someone who has no inclination of doing this. We have to recognize that these individuals are these Masons and they're brothers, but they simply are going in a different path than we're going. And you have to respect that and say, I wish you well, but this is not my path, and good luck to you. And I don't know that there is an answer, any other answer to that.
Yes.
Brother Michael, thank you so much for being here this morning. During your presentation, you did mention more than once the concept or theme of making men better. But also during the presentation, one statement came out that you cannot change someone. How do you reconcile that challenge on both ends? Because I agree with both concepts, what you mentioned. But how would you reconcile this duality, this conflict between those two concepts?
I have no ability to change another person, but I have a choice. I can change me. And that, I believe, is the key. You can't change another person, but I have the ability to decide what path I'm going on and what I'm doing. And if my path is seen by someone else and they say, well, you know, I think that might be a good idea, then that's not me changing them. That's them making their own personal choice. It's kind of like if I say I like this particular restaurant and I say, wow, I enjoyed it. This food is great. And then someone else says, hey, good food. I'm going to try that restaurant. Well, I didn't make them go there. They decided that themselves. So I can't make somebody else do anything, and I can't change anybody. But I'm simply saying that we can change ourselves, and we shouldn't concern anything other than the individual.
Yes, down front here.
Good morning. Brother Benjamin Littman of Shiloh McCall Lodge, number 558. I'm going to be in the East next year, and I am trying to bring in programs that I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from the Lodge to add different elements of what excites me about Masonry that can excite others, including the Academy of Masonic Knowledge. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback. But one thing in particular I'm really interested in is music. And you mentioned that during your presentation. What are multiple ways that you can add music into a lodge or any of the different liberal arts to help make a lodge more, not a club, but more of a place of enlightenment in using those tools?
Some of the best initiations and that I've seen, music was involved. When I joined Masonry, I met at the Masonic Temple building in New Orleans, and there was an old large pipe organ that they had, and it clearly had been out of use for many years. And I tried to play it and just made a hissing sound. But at one time, music was very much a part of all aspects of Masonic Lodge operating, the initiation, different times during the lodge meetings that have music. And music is to me, it's vitally important because it sets a tone. We talked about the proper setting for an initiation, and I believe that that's a vital part of it. The problem is many lodges don't have a piano or an organ. I've seen times where someone brought an acoustic guitar in and played during a greeting. It was beautiful. I've seen other times where someone brought a saxophone in. And with the appropriate music, I believe it's an ideal setting. It's a perfect match for the, and this is one of the things I believe that was the speculative addition to the Masonic experience. But yes, I think canned music, I've seen, I've seen problems with that at times when it doesn't work properly, or it either plays too low or too loud, or you have problems. These can be overcome. The best is actual music played live. If you can't get that, you do what you can. But yeah, I really think that music during an initiation or during a meeting for different times is a very positive thing.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, I have one more question for you, Michael. There is a movement, of course, abroad, and we have a couple of lodges like that in Pennsylvania. The Traditional Observance Lodge, which is an attempt to get back to the old degrees and sort of engage in search for enlightenment instead of just being merely a club. And outlawed Traditional Observance Lodge. Would you explain why that happened?
Yeah, it was outlawed for a period of time because there was, in a lot of jurisdictions, it was felt that alcohol was not allowed in a lodge room. And I believe it all comes from misunderstandings of what is going on in a Traditional Observance Lodge. I've seen lodges that do perform traditional observance, but we actually have two Traditional Observance Lodges now in Louisiana that have formed since that. But there was a problem for a lot of years, just simply that they felt that alcohol was a problem. And there's been some jurisdictions that were concerned about Traditional Observance Lodges because there was, best I can understand, a lack of understanding as to what they were. And there's a dual problem, and it's some feeling that the Traditional Observance Lodge is looking down on them, and so they want to look down on them first rather than before. It's a basic lack of understanding, I believe. And in the journal, we had Pete Norman did a wonderful piece on the Traditional Observance movement, I think. And I think that there's more that needs to be understood about that and more that needs to be written about it, because I believe it's a very important aspect, and it's not a new aspect, it's something that's returning to how things were.
Anybody else? No.
I'm Brendan Hickey from Thompson Lodge number 340 in Paoli. You mentioned the problems of ignorance, falsehood, and ambition. And to me, it seems like the first two are pretty clear, but I'm really curious to know about the problem of ambition and why that's such a killer.
It is ambition hooked on to ignorance and falsehood that causes the problem. An individual who is sincerely looking to improve himself, you can say that's ambition. But when someone says, gee, if I play up to this person, I can get this office, or maybe I can get this degree. And once there becomes a reward and punishment system that's even perceived, then you realize that if you do this, you're going to get a reward, but if you do this, you're going to get punished. And if it's all tied to offices that you could receive, honors that you can receive, degrees that you can be received, then all of a sudden you want this because you want to be a big shot. You want to be somebody important. And that's where the negative aspect of ambition comes in. And you start compromising what Masonry teaches in order to get something. And you become driven to get something. And then result of that is if you see somebody who you even perceive that could deny you something, you want to get them. You want to do them harm, discredit them. And so that aspect of ambition, when it's tied to ignorance and falsehood, you usually, if you're seeing a problem, and it can be any body within Masonry, it can be any lodge, anywhere, if you see something that's really wrong or not working, and you look hard enough, you usually can trace it to those three elements. And in somebody looking to gain something that they don't really maybe are entitled to, and they're willing to do whatever it takes in order to get it. That's the aspect of ambition that's a problem.
Ted?
Yes, Gene.
Two things. First of all, before I forget it, about a year ago there was a young gentleman who approached me at the Academy and wanted to talk about the possibility during my term of starting a TO lodge, Traditional Observance Lodge, in the Philadelphia area. I explained to him at the time, I said, I have not been to a Traditional Observance Lodge. I can't promise you what I would want to do or how I feel about them, but I will do that. So I have made a point of attending both of the Traditional Observance Lodges in Pennsylvania over the last year. I don't remember who that was. If that individual is here and wishes to approach me again, please do. That was one thing. Secondly, last evening, you should understand, the committee always has the privilege of meeting on Friday evening before the Academy, of having dinner with the speakers. In the course of last evening's dinner, I made a comment, and Michael said, well, you just said what I was going to say, some of the things I was going to say in my talk tomorrow. And I said, well, you say it, and then when I give my inaugural address, they'll think I stole it from you. I have to indicate that I turned in my inaugural address about a week and a half ago to the Pennsylvania Freemason. Just so you don't think that I stole it from him. But what I want to indicate is that Michael and I, as I've sat here and listened to his presentation, listened to him last evening, and listened to the eloquence that he utilized when he was answering your questions, he and I seem to have a great deal of similarities as we approach our thought processes on Freemasonry. And I'm thrilled that you were here, Michael. I was very excited about listening to your presentation. I look forward to continuing these conversations in the future. You did a very nice job, and I think that the Academy is much better off your having been here today. That was all. Thank you.
I'll just add that I've been a Mason long enough to know certain things that I did steal that from the Right Worshipful Brother. I would not.
Well, I also want to thank you, brothers. I think that this was one of the most productive question and answer sessions that we've ever had. So thank you for your attention and for your good questions. So we'll adjourn now until 1:15. We'll have lunch and we'll get back together 1:15 and we'll hear Brother Bridegroom. So thanks again. And I should remind you there's a donation for lunch. The suggested donation is